Good morning.
Good morning.
Greg Week, Senior Pastor here, and it's a joy to share worship with you on this Labor Day weekend. We are in a series of sermons that are collectively titled Back to School. Lessons from especially the Scriptures that help point us to things to do as we go back to school, whether school is a literal school or the school of life. We talked a couple of Sundays ago about the need to balance our lives to be sure that as culture comes at us, we at the same time do due diligence with our spiritual lives, deepen them. Last week we talked about having fun, how you should never do homework on the Sabbath. Within reason, of course. So today we're going to learn what Jesus is teaching us in two very interesting encounters that people had with Jesus. And Luke does a great job of cobbling these two stories that happened at different points in Jesus' ministry. He cobbled these two stories together to get a point across. As you hear Bonnie read these two passages from Luke, see if you can't tell what Luke is trying to convey to us. Hear now the word of the Lord.
From Luke chapter 6. One Sabbath, while Jesus was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked some heads of grain, rubbed them in their hands, and ate them. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.' On another Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and taught. And there was a man there whose right hand was withered. The scribes and the Pharisees watched him to see whether he would cure on the Sabbath, so that they might find an accusation against him. Even though he knew what they were thinking, he said to the man who had the withered hand, 'Come and stand here.' He got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, 'I ask you, is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or destroy it?' After looking around at all of them, he said to him, 'Stretch out your hand.' He did so, and his hand was restored. But they were filled with fury and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus.
Dear Pastor, thank you for inviting us to your church. We've never been in a church before, and we've always been curious about it. We really liked how friendly everyone was and how focused the church seems to be on helping others. We look forward to becoming full members soon. Now, I'm the kind of person who likes to do everything right. I play by the rules. And I know the Bible is your handbook, so I've spent the last week or so reading up on it, trying to make a list of everything that's required in order to be a good Christian. I've only gotten a few chapters in, and I already have a lot of questions that I'd like to run by you, just so I'm clear. First of all, we just got a new grill a couple of weeks ago, and I'm ashamed to say this now, but the first week we had it, we barbecued both shrimp and pork, and, well, there was also some fat on the pork steaks. Then I read in Leviticus that it's an abomination to eat shrimp, pork, or fat, and we had all three. What should we do now that we've already consumed it? And since we had the grill, I thought that maybe the way to make up for our abomination was to go ahead and just burn a bull as a sacrifice, like the Bible says. Well, we couldn't fit a whole bull on the grill, so we hoped maybe a really big brisket would do. There's not much fat on that, at least. Now, I know that the odor is supposed to be pleasing to the Lord, But when it started really burning up, our neighbors were not too pleased with the odor, and they came over to check on us. It was a little awkward. So how do your members usually explain that? And speaking of neighbors, we have several who routinely work on the Sabbath, and I'm pretty sure they also go to church. Now, I confess, I used to be right there with them, mowing the lawn, catching up on my bills, but I know now that Exodus clearly states that whoever does work on the Sabbath shall be put to death. That's pretty strict, don't you think? Is there any wiggle room on that rule? Can I at least check my email or something? And while we're on Exodus, in chapter 21, it says that I can sell our daughter into slavery. And frankly, she's been kind of a handful lately, and she's sure not doing what we ask her to do. So I thought maybe just for a couple of months, we might sell her to our friends who just had twins. They need a lot of help, and you know, maybe she'll appreciate how easy she's got it over here once she's back. Anyway, could you advise us about the going rate for a 15-year-old? Finally, my wife is pretty upset about her garden. She's already sown multiple kinds of seeds in it, and the woman has everything from tomatoes to peppers to zucchini in there, all intermingling, which I realize now is strictly forbidden. Do your church members plant multiple gardens so that each one has its own kind of seed? Or do you all have a produce exchange, or what? We're doing our best to try to understand and follow all of this, but frankly, we're finding it a lot harder to be Christians than we thought it would be. I know you have studied these rules extensively, so I'm confident that you can help us out. We just want to do the right thing. Sincerely, Bob Brown.
And if I were the pastor receiving Bob's letter, I would quote Jesus and say, oy vey, you know? Yeah, we all want to do the right thing, but is the right thing simply getting a book of rules and following them? It'd be a lot easier that way. And sometimes in trying to follow the right rules, it really, when you get right down to it, sort of involves a lot of our psychological stuff. A lot of our psychological baggage gets laid onto those rules as we try to do the right thing. Because you know as well as I that in trying to do the right thing, well, rules can give us a sort of identity, you know? That if we follow the rules, then we're good. And if we don't follow the rules, well, we're not. So we're going to follow the rules without asking questions. And it gives us sort of security, too, that if we take all the Old Testament there and all those rules that you heard, then this world is black and white. Don't have to worry about the grays or questioning things, you know. And also, our need for authority can get involved with all of these rules, because if we know the rules and we follow them, then we have power over those who are sinners. No wonder Jesus would say, oy vey, no wonder. Because for him, your security is wrapped up in your relationship with God, not in how you obey the rules. For Jesus, your authority would lie in being able to be obedient to God's word, not in following the rules. For Jesus, your identity would be wrapped up in how you would connect with the community of faith, living under the lordship of Christ, not simply in following the rules. Now, obviously, the rules and laws are important. I'm not saying they're not. But because we have so much of our psychological and emotional baggage linked to when we want to do the right thing all the time, that somehow laws become more a point of legalism than of helping us cultivate and discover life. We get hooked up into into blindly, like the people that Jesus encountered, blindly following whatever is on the written page. And if Jesus were here, he would say to Brother Bob, it is essential that if you want to follow me, you must question these rules that you were quoting. You have to ask the questions. Jesus did. And you know what it got him? It got him to those folks who were so bound up by their identity and security and authority in the rules and safeguarding them that at the very end of that passage that you heard Bonnie read to you, it was, and they were filled with fury, and they took counsel as to, in another translation, took counsel as to how to destroy Jesus. Nope, Jesus would say, Brother Bob, you got to question the rules, and here's how you do it. That if something strikes you as weird and that you have some concern about it as a Christian, you should do these three things. You should ask yourself, in any situation where you're puzzled by a certain rule, written or unwritten, does this address human need or does it deny it? Does it promote good or does it promote harm? Does this affirm life or destroy it? To me, that's what the passage that you heard Bonnie read is all about. You ask yourself those three questions on anything that, especially anything that someone says, this is what you must believe, right or wrong. And I think in the arenas of our lives, and we all have different arenas in which we live in, those arenas have to always come under the power of those three questions, like at school. I don't know about you, but in middle school, especially for me, that was when everything in life became cliquish, right? That it was important for you, very important for you, to find what group you fit into. Was it the jocks? Was it the populars? Was it the socias? Was it the druggies? Was it the rebels? Was it the goths? Was it the nerds? And you had to find where you were because you had your identity wrapped up and the other people, you already had your mind made up about them, right? That is one of the worst sins any human can commit. Because what you're doing in saying, following the rule of find your clique and stay there, is that you're denying basic humanity to another person. You're saying, you know who he or she is, and glad that I'm not like that. You question the cliquish rule in school or in church. Any congregation has written and unwritten rules that they live by. Rules, assumptions, rules about what you should wear, how you should worship, what you should do with your coffee. Every rule that one has in church must come under the scrutiny of this. I was in a church once, worshiping. I went in the main door and sat down in church, had a great worship service. As the worship ended, all the congregation went out the side door. That was a rule. I didn't know. I wondered what I missed. Donuts. That's a sin. You know, you question the rules. Where'd that rule come from? And who was denied sugar and fat and grease? I was. Question the rule. And quite frankly, if there is any rule that a church has that keeps a person from encountering Christ, that rule goes out the door. Is that not what Jesus would do? And of course, in the arena of the society, the culture in which we live, it is the Christian's duty to question the rules and in any situation ask, does that rule address human need, deny it, promote good or harm, affirm life or destroy? And just think of our country. The more I read about what is happening in the Mideast, in the countries of Africa, how appreciative I am of a country where you have the right to question, to protest, to push. Just think of what would happen in this country if folks had not historically risen up on behalf of women's rights, the right of women to vote. Our founding fathers said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Yeah, and the women couldn't vote. Isn't it good that people like Abigail Adams, the wife of the founding father John Adams and one of the early presidents, had the courage to push? Here's a quote from a letter that Abigail wrote John, and I love it. As the Constitution was being written in the Bill of Rights, she wrote to John, "In the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands." Well, I don't know whether I like that, but she wrote it. But I do like this next. "Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." She questioned the rules, right? And, well, it took a few decades, but women's rights and women could vote because someone's questioned the rules. And think of how much more homophobic our culture would be had it not been, especially in recent years, people standing up and saying, this is not right. It is not right to discriminate against someone because of his or her sexual orientation. And because people have stood up and people have asked that question and those questions when seeing these laws in society, well, we have a better understanding of what it is like to have an sexual orientation of gay or lesbian or transgender or bisexual. You have a better understanding now as we work through this of where human sexuality and spirituality intersect. We are pushed to understand what the Scriptures say about this in a broader context. And we ask, what really is the gospel and good news for all, and what does that mean? Because we have, and more people have the courage to look at society within this area, this boundary of sexual orientation, and ask those questions. And of course, the last few weeks, as we struggle with Ferguson, it tells us once again, shows us once again, our imperative to be able to always question what's going on in society. We would like to say that, yeah, racism is behind us and there is smooth sailing in the culture and the kingdom of God has come, and we know it's not the case. Situations like that a few weeks ago unfortunately show that there's still a lot of probing and asking that has to be done. Where is the latent racism still alive in our society? What causes us to react on all sides in such ways, at times violently? And if anything, any good comes from this horrible situation, it will be that we understand once again that reconciliation does not come simply from donations, but it comes from when we're able to understand people whose life experiences, backgrounds are different from our own. And when the churches, especially in the mosques and the synagogues, all people of faith who have courage to ask questions like this can do that together, then maybe relationships will be built and bridges constructed. And maybe Ferguson will not repeat itself. But it only comes from people who dare not accept the status quo, but ask the questions that Jesus would ask in society and in the institutions that we're a part of and in our own personal lives. Now, what I've said up to this point is civil disobedience 101, whether it's civil disobedience in church or in culture or in homes and schools or what have you. It's pretty heady. But Jesus, as only the Master could, shows us another way, a deeper way of understanding civil disobedience, if you will. And it's shown so beautifully in these two passages. Jesus broke the law because, A, his disciples were hungry. There was human need. And B, there was this man who had a withered arm. Jesus' heart broke. That's a great line about Jesus. Jesus was always having compassion. His heart was breaking. And because he felt human pain, he was able to say ultimately, remember, man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for man, for humanity, for human need. And so that's why he could break the rules, if you will. That's why we must break the rules, if you will, when you see those questions being answered in the negative. Our civil disobedience comes when we're able to understand what it feels like to be that young person sitting alone at a table in the cafeteria at lunchtime. Our civil disobedience comes when we're able to understand what it feels like to be a woman who has the same job as a man but makes 77 cents to his dollar. Our civil disobedience, our questioning authority, comes from when we're able to understand what it feels like for a young lady to be struggling with how to share with her parents that she is lesbian. Our civil disobedience comes when we're able to really feel the grief that a mother would have for a son who's been shot. Our civil disobedience comes when we're able to feel what it feels like to be a police officer who is standing in a line to protect protesters and to have a brick thrown at him. Only when we feel that can we be able to stand up against that. And standing up against that, we catch more flack because it comes from compassion and not just from an ought to hold a sign. But as Jesus would say, when you catch the flack, blessed are you. Blessed are you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. I love the Bible. I'm fascinated by the Bible because I've lived with this Bible for so many years, and every so often I will read that and I'll say, I never saw that before. And in the passage that Bonnie read, the very end, I want to lift up to you something that, I never saw that before, that I found. Jesus, when he's in the synagogue, the person with the withered hand, he gets up and he brings the person over like an object lesson. Look at this person, bent over with this withered hand, with the lame hand. Look at this person, as if he's saying. And then he says, I tell you, is it lawful to do good or harm, save life or destroy it on the Sabbath? And then he goes on and heals the person, and everybody lives happily ever after. Except, I never caught what the Message translation especially makes very clear. He has the person up there, he says what he says, but then the Message says, and he looked around, looked each one in the eye. You catch that? It's like he had this pregnant pause. He stopped, and with his arm around this person, he looks. He looks into the faces of these religious leaders, so inflamed at him. He looks as if he's wanting at least one person to get it. As if he wants one person to see the pain of this person beside him, and one person to say, yes, Lord, I do get it. It is lawful to do good, not harm. It is lawful to build up and save life, not hurt and destroy it. Friends, the only way a bigot's heart, a racist heart, a homophobe's heart, a sexist heart, a cliquish student's heart, or our hearts will ever be changed is when we are able to answer, yeah, I feel it. I get it, Lord. It is right to do good. This morning, Jesus is looking at you. He's looking at me. How will you answer? How will I?